Welcome back to another A Beginner's Guide 2. This time we're looking at what is probably the biggest copium deck I've got going. It is, of course, Regidrago with Arceus. Ah, man, I really want this deck to be good. So, the crux of this deck, let's get straight into it, shall we, is Regidrago V-STAR. It has an attack called Apex Dragon. Choose an attack from a dragon Pokemon in your discard pile and use it as this attack. So, your tactic with this deck is to get as many dragons into the discard pile as possible, not including Regidrago V-STAR, obviously. Then use whichever attack from whichever dragon you need to, which is appropriate for the current situation you're in. So let's go through a few of those, shall we? First of all, we have our 4 main attacking dragons that we don't actually use to attack, we just want to get rid of them. That is, of course, Duraludon VMAX, G-Max Pulverization for 220. This attack's damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon, so it is what is known as Shred. It just goes through anything. If there's a V-Guard there, it goes through. An ability that says that we take X less damage, it goes through. It's very, very good. Very, very useful in this deck. Next up, Giratina V-STAR. Lost Impact for 280 damage. Put 2 energy attached to your Pokemon in the lost zone. A very good, just like, we do not want to deal with you right now. Bang, 280 damage. Quite often you're combining that with Choice Belt or something else as well to hit for the bigger 310 number. It's fantastic to use in this deck. You do still have to put the 2 energy attached to your Pokemon in the lost zone, but again, as we've mentioned with other decks, it's any Pokemon. So you can just attach them wherever. If you've retreated an Arceus, which we'll get to in a minute, put their energy in there, it's fine. Giratina has it all. Probably the most common card you'll be using, Hisuian Goodra V-STAR with the Rolling Iron attack for 200 damage. During your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 80 less damage from attacks, which is absolutely fantastic. Again, something that Shred would ignore, but you're hoping you're not going against Shred. And finally, we have the new Noivern EX. 2 attacks on this one, both very good in different situations. Covert Flight, which only does 70 damage, but during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basic Pokemon, which really upsets Lost Box, Miraidon, a few others, so very, very good attack there. And the other attack is Dominating Echo for 140. During your opponent's next turn, they can't play any special energy or stadium cards from their hand. So if you're playing a deck that would like to get rid of Path to the Peak, and you think you can survive an attack, maybe you go for Dominating Echo. Make sure they can't get rid of Path to the Peak. Maybe they're going to look at using a Jet Energy next turn, or maybe that card there needs a double turbo. You just stop it from doing anything. It's very, very good. It's a very fun control element that's been added to Regidrago since its introduction. How are we powering up Regidrago V-STAR? Well, we go back to an old favourite, Arceus V-STAR. Trinity Nova, 200 damage, search your deck for up to 3 basic energy cards, attach them to your Pokemon V in any way you like, then shuffle your deck. It's such a good engine. It doesn't hit necessarily for the numbers you'd like it to these days. You're kind of accepting Regidrago isn't attacking until turn 3 at this stage, but you kind of need that time anyway to get some dragons into the discard pile, so having Arceus there to either soften up the target or just straight up power up a Regidrago or 2 is very, very helpful. And of course the V-STAR power, which is probably the one you're going to end up using, Starbirth. During your turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 cards, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. You literally just pick 2 cards out of the deck. It's very powerful. And there's plenty of options in this deck too. Finally, one kind of support Pokemon, that is Squawkabilly EX. You're really only here for the Squawk and Seize, but the attack actually helps in this deck too. Squawk and Seize, once during your first turn you may discard your hand and draw 6 cards. You can't use more than 1 Squawk and Seize ability during your turn. So if you've got those dragons that you don't necessarily need right now, such as the Giratina, the Goodra, etc., you can get rid of them very quickly using Squawk and Seize. And Motivate only does 20 damage, but for 1 energy, attach up to 2 basic energy cards from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. So if you've had to get rid of a couple of energy as well, either using Ultra Balls or through Squawk and Seize, you can just power up a Pokemon. Yeah, you're going to lose the Squawkabilly probably, but it's very, very nice to have. It's a really good option. And 20 damage is nothing to be sniffed at. So, once again, how are we finding our Pokemon? First of all, you've got Ultra Ball. You can use this card only if you discard 2 other cards from your hand. Search your deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your deck. You can chain these together quite interestingly as well. If you've got like everything else set up, but you're still looking for your dragons in the discard, you can discard a dragon and something else, find another one with the Ultra Ball, then use another Ultra Ball to discard that dragon and get rid of something else to find another. It can really chain really well. Ultra Ball's a very, very good card in this deck. Otherwise, you've got Capturing Aroma. Flip a coin. If heads, search your deck for an evolution Pokemon, reveal it, put it in your hand. If tails, search your deck for a basic Pokemon, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your deck. Quite often, you are aiming for a heads flip on this one to find the dragons you want to get rid of. But, you know, sometimes you do rely on it to find your Regidragos and stuff, so It's an interesting card. You kind of have to like play on the fly a little bit with that one. On top of that, for more discard options, you've got Trekking Shoes. Look at the top card of your deck. You may put that card into your hand. If you don't, discard that card and draw a card. So if you flip that card and it's Goodra, you know you can chuck it straight in, get the next one. Very, very good card to get through the deck. 2 pivoting options. Escape Rope. Each player switches their active Pokemon with one of their bench Pokemon. First opponent goes first. And switch your active Pokemon, one of your bench Pokemon. So, very simple there. Stadiums, we've got 3. Collapse Stadium. Each player can't have more than 4 bench Pokemon. If a player has 5 or more bench Pokemon, they discard bench Pokemon until they have 4 Pokemon on the bench. The player who played this card discards first. If more than one effect changes the number of bench Pokemon allowed, use the smaller number. That's just there to kind of disrupt your opponent a little bit. Maybe for some reason you've got a full bench and a Squawkabilly. You can bump off the Squawkabilly. Don't know why you have a full bench, but here we are. Path to the Peak. Once you've used your V-Star ability, who cares? Pokemon with the rulebox in play have no abilities. Very, very nice to have. And finally, Pokestop. Once during each player's turn, that player may discard 3 cards from the top of their deck. If the player discards any item cards in this way, they put those item cards into their hand. So I mentioned earlier, Arceus V-Star is probably the ability you're going to go with, Starbirth, but Regidrago does have one as well. During your turn, you may discard the top 7 cards of your deck, then put up to 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. So if you're having to absolutely dig for something and you're just not finding it, and maybe you just haven't had the ability to use Arceus V-Star for whatever reason, Legacy Star does offer the ability to pull back some cards. Maybe you don't even care about what gets thrown away. Maybe you need a second use of a switch. There's a couple of applications there. It's not, I wouldn't say it's better than Arceus, but it's definitely there as an option. As far as your supporters are concerned, Professor's Research, of course, you're going to want to get rid of those dragons, discard your hand and draw 7 cards. Boss's Orders, because you're going to want to pick your knockout, switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. Iono, each player shuffles their hand and puts it on the bottom of their deck. If either player puts any cards on the bottom of their deck in this way, each player draws a card for each of their remaining prize cards. Once again, it's a case of like, if you need to, if your hand's no good, you could just get rid of it, get yourself some new stuff. Hopefully it helps you against your opponent as well, because quite often you're losing an Arceus before you start attacking Regidrago. If you can get them down to 4 cards in the hand, it just disrupts them a little bit. One that's maybe underrated a little bit, Adventures Discovery. Search your deck for up to 3 Pokemon V, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. The applications of this are obvious. You need to find your V-Stars, then you can find them pretty quickly, your Arceus, your Regidrago. You can use this to set up as well. If you haven't got a Regidrago already, you can find your Regidrago that way. But the most fun I've had with this deck and this setup is using Adventures Discovery. If you're going second, go find all 3 dragons you need, immediately Squawkabillying them and going, well, that's that setup, and hope off the Squawkabilly you have what you need to get the rest of the deck set up. It's a very fun combination if you can pull it off. And finally, 2 tools. Choice Belt attack. The attacks of this Pokemon, this card is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon V. Mostly there for the relevant numbers for hitting 310 with Lost Impact, but with Duraludon as well with Shred, hitting with 250 with Shred, Goodra hitting for 200, 230. It does help the numbers a little bit. And Leafy Camo Poncho, because you do not want your Regidrago being bossed up before you're ready. Whenever your opponent plays a supporter card from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to the Pokemon V-Star or Pokemon VMAX this card is attached to. Now, quite often, to get around the Goodra thing and the Noivern thing, if you've got 2 Regidrago available, 1 active, 1 benched, you'll either get escape roped or bossed into... Boss is probably the more common one. Into the other Regidrago so the opponent can knock it out. If the benched Regidrago has Leafy Camo Poncho, they can't do that, so the Regidrago you've got in the active sticks, and they can't get around that 80 damage without escape rope. It's very, very good to have. And finally, for the energy counts, we've got 4 double turbo energy because we want our Arceus powered up as quick as possible. It's also there to throw away with Lost Impact for Giratina. 1 V-Guard energy, just take 30 less damage. It does help having Arceus at 310 health and Regidrago at 310 health, plus the 80 walling. It's very nice. And 6 grass, 3 fire to make sure we can get our Regidragos powered up. So it's certainly not a brilliant deck, but it's very fun. And if you can get it set up by turn 3, turn 4, you can have a lot of fun with this deck. It is really good. So, as far as other considerations for this deck, Flygon V is your first option. If your opponent's active Pokemon is a Pokemon VMAX, this attack does 160 more damage and discards 3 energy from this Pokemon. The discard 3 energy from this Pokemon is kind of annoying. It's definitely like a final attack kind of thing, but hitting for 320 plus Choice Belt, you're knocking out any VMAX in the format. It's very nice, a good consideration to have. And similarly, it's definitely a finisher card. Garchomp V Sonic Strike, discard 3 energy from this Pokemon. This attack does 220 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. benched included. So if Manavee's not in play, that's finishing off a basic EX, that's finishing off a Pokemon V. There's definitely an argument to be made with Garchomp. The problem with Garchomp and Flygon V is they're both basic Pokemon, so you can end up having them as your starting Pokemon, and they are useless. Like, you need to wait until they're knocked out to be able to use them. You don't run the energy to make those cards work. The only other card that you could add, which doesn't fall under that category, is Dragonite. Dragonite is basically a baby Arceus. Energy Hurricane for 180 damage. Search your deck for up to 3 basic energy cards and attach them to your Pokemon, not just Pokemon V, to your Pokemon in any way you like, then shuffle your deck. It's a card I've considered more than a couple of times because quite often you'll lose the Arceus before you can get both your Regidragos set up. If you have a turn where you can get away with doing 180 damage and not worry about any walling, you can then power up another Regidrago while also not having to worry about setting up another Arceus or doing it manually. Like, you definitely should be manually powering up a Regidrago alongside using Arceus, but it's an interesting card to include. It's one of 3 that I think would be very helpful. So there you go. I don't know what the biggest weaknesses of this deck is, other than setup. You need to set up Arceus, you need to set up Regidrago, and then you need to get your 3 or 4 dragons into the discard. It's quite annoying to run any Arceus deck at the moment because almost everything seems to be able to hit for 220 on the first turn going second, so it's a bit awkward. One of the biggest things that I found in this deck as well, and I think the game does it on purpose, at least in real life, is whatever card you need to win a game is prized. If you need Shred, Duraludon's going to be prized. If you need to hit those big numbers, Giratina's going to be prized. It just seems to be a deck that, like, the prizes can really upset your game plan quite easily. So there you go, there's Regidrago with Arceus V-STAR. Would I recommend it in a big championship? Probably not, but it's a very, very fun deck, especially on the ladder. If you can get it set up and learn how to set it up quickly, it's a powerhouse. I've won games just based off Noivern existing. Noivern discard 1 Regidrago and just using Covert Flight constantly. It's such a pain, but it wins games, so I'm certainly not complaining. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been Regidrago and Arceus V-STAR. If you've enjoyed this video, please let me know. Leave me any feedback in the comments. Really appreciate it. Deck list should be in the description below, as well as all my social media links. And I'll see you in the next one. See ya.